Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys, whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble. Today, I'm very happy to have SL Kanthan with me from India. He is a geopolitical analyst, and he himself launched a podcast, Geopolitics Demystified, right? Am I
Yes.
pronouncing it correct, my
Yeah.
friend? And he is hosting also regularly guests on his podcast. So I would highly encourage you to follow also his podcast for comprehensive understanding of what's going on around the world. I'm very happy to have you today, my friend, to discuss with you what is happening around the world. Especially, let's focus on the statements of the NATO chief Blinken and the criticism directed at China and at Russia, in the context of the Ukraine war and the rise of the multipolar world that the West is trying to stop. So welcome to Syriana Analysis.
Thank you so much, Kevork. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
It's a great pleasure for me. My friend, I would like to start with you because before we go to these statements, it's important for the audience to know the nature of the support that China provides to Russia, especially in the context of the Ukraine war. Now, before the Ukraine war, I realized that China and Russia were trying to strike, especially trade and energy deals, in a way that Russia can immunize itself against the sanctions when or if an offensive from the Russian side starts. In my opinion, the Russians predicted and understood that this is the weapon that the Western world are going to use against Russia when the offensive starts against Ukraine. So they tried to immunize themselves through these trade deals, the energy deals with China, in order to be able to do business as usual. But after the February 2022, I have been reading and listening to many criticism directed at China, that China is enabling the Russian war machine in Ukraine. And if you are a president of any Western country or official in Western country, in my opinion, you, from your position, you want to criticize China, right? Because you don't want China to help Russia. But what is the nature of this support from the Chinese side to the Russians? I would like to know more about this case, if you please elaborate.
Sure. Yeah. So, first of all, the big picture is that China just cannot allow Russia to fail. Okay. So that's basic geopolitics, because if you just imagine Russia being a puppet of the US, it'll be really terrible for China to have this huge neighbor in the north with thousands of kilometers of shared border. And, can you just imagine Russia's 5,000, 6,000 nuclear weapons all being pointed at Beijing and Shanghai? Is just not a very good situation. And then there's also the economic considerations. Russia is a huge source of natural resources, the oil and gas. And just like you said, Russia wants, to immunize itself from the sanctions. So similarly, China also wants to immunize itself from the blockades, because if there is some sort of a war with the the US will try to block the oil and gas transportation to China through the Malacca Straits or, Red Sea, whatever. So China also wants a backup plan, and it's going to be Russia, which can provide oil, gas, wheat, um, corn. All the basic stuff that China needs for just a regular the consumption, as well as also to feed the chicken, the cows, and all of that.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very win-win situation. It's like a match made in heaven,
Mm.
because China is the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, and Russia has all the natural resources, and Russia is also very good in the defense. So For a long time, China used to depend on Russian fighter jets, Russian missile defense systems, Russian submarines, and so on. So it's a very good match, and they help each other, and they know that if one fails, the other one will be the next. It'll be
Yes.
like the domino effect.
Yes. My friend, you just opened my eyes to something I didn't think about it before. So this is something that I argued since the 2014 coup, which I used to say that one of the reasons why the US did this coup in order to draw a line in Ukraine, and also so that Russia cannot project its geopolitical might inside of Eastern Europe, in Eastern Europe, or even more to have this economic integration with the economic powerhouse in Europe, and that is Germany. Now that you opened my eyes to this and you say China is the global economic powerhouse. So when the American and British geopolitical experts used to argue and warn against any sort of economic integration between Germany and Russia, I think this is going to be outdated after the 2022 offensive of Russia and Ukraine, because now it's China that is replacing this economic powerhouse of the world. Therefore, the main danger that the Americans should really try to sabotage from their perspective, that is this integration between China and Russia, the natural resources of Russia and the economic powerhouse of China. So it seems to me that China is replacing Germany in this case, and this is more dangerous because they're neighbors, and the amount of investment that China is doing around the world, it just gives me the impression that China is actually going to be the next superpower. And even though the Russia will also be a superpower, but Russia will be beyond the superpower in this case. So I really want to know from which perspective the Western governments, when they criticize China, like they want to persuade China, right? Like I'm talking like as a Western official now. Like I want for China not to have good relationship with Russia, right? But attacking China instead of trying to attract China on the Western camp, and giving China a position in this unipolar world, the so-called rules-based order, giving more responsibilities for China around the world. This is not happening. They want to sanction China and the Chinese companies. They want to impose big tariffs on them. They keep speaking about overcapacity, and they call the Chinese president Xi Jinping a dictator, this and that all the time. And then they want China not to have good relationship with Russia. It seems to me, at least, that this is not a policy that I would like to pursue if I'm a Western politician, right?
Yeah. I mean, it just makes no sense, right? Because if you look at the U.S. media, politicians, they scream all kinds of bad things about China all the time. Like as you said, they call Xi Jinping a dictator, CCP. So it's actually a CPC, but the Americans are so rude. They call it the CCP, and it's just constant demonization. And they have sanctioned 1,000 plus Chinese tech companies in the last 6 years. And they tried to kill Huawei, China's most important tech company. And they have sanctioned all sorts of, they've stopped the Netherlands and Japan from selling semiconductor the equipment to China. And they've stopped Taiwan from selling chips to China. So they're trying, then they're building a brand new military bases in the Philippines. And Biden brought in South Korea and Japan a few months ago to form this trilateral, the group to think about the war with China later on. And you see all these think tanks, the influencers, the insiders in Washington, D.C., they're all pretty much geared for a war against China. And there was just an article in the Foreign Affairs by this guy who was very close to Trump, and he wrote this long article about how the U.S. needs to get ready for a war with China. They need to
Yes.
supply a lot more missiles to Japan. Blah blah blah. So they are really threatening China, and they are really threatening Russia. And then they wonder, why is China and Russia getting along? It's like the worst and the most ridiculous geopolitical strategy, so going back to the 1990s, that's where this wrong strategy began, So like if we go and look at, all these really powerful geopolitical experts like Brzezinski, Gerald Siegel, and if we see what they said in the late 1990s, we can see the effect right now. There is this group in Washington, D.C., and these Zionists. They really hate Russia. It's not even logical, pragmatic. It's just like real
Mm.
hatred, you know and this hatred really blinds them. So in the 1990s, in 97, Brzezinski wrote an article, and in that he says that we need to split Russia and Germany. We need to make
Mhm.
sure that the Europeans don't become way too prosperous, and we need to bring in the Eastern European countries into NATO. And he specifically mentions Ukraine,
Yes.
because once you take the Black Sea, and once you remove Russia's warm water seaport in Crimea, Sevastopol, that would really weaken Russia. So that's what it's all about. And they planned it in the 1990s. And then they also thought that China would never be successful.
Yes.
Like it was there, the blinds again. Oh, China is communist, is so poor, so they can never succeed, and that was their staunch belief. And we could see that even like 5 6 years ago, people wrote about how China is going to collapse. And even now, like if you go to YouTube and if you see China collapse, those videos, they get millions of views, And there are these really
Mm.
very dumb people like Peter Zion, who is basically supported by the CIA. And he spreads all these fake analyses like the demographic collapse of China, the real estate is going to collapse, blah blah blah. So they're very schizophrenic, So you can read the U.S. media on Monday, but you will read about how China is collapsing, and then on Wednesday it'll be like, oh my God, China is going to take over the world. So they cannot make up their mind, and they go between back and forth. And so like this is a really stupid and a dangerous idea. And they pushed, like if we look at Russia, there was like absolutely no reason to demonize Russia, to antagonize Russia. In the 1990s, the Russians loved America.
Mhm.
They embraced, they just embraced whatever the Americans said. And all these Wall Street guys, the Harvard guys, they came and deliberately gave them the wrong the economic advice, like privatization and so on. and that just totally destroyed Russia. And then Putin came and saved Russia, and they could have easily made friends with Putin. In the beginning, Putin wanted to join NATO.
Yes.
So just imagine how peaceful it would have been, and then they could have used Russia as a leverage against China,
Hmm.
right? So, that was an easy solution because they were never going to be fully allied with China because of just the fundamental, the economic difference, the philosophical difference, and China was never going to let BlackRock come and buy everything, and Wall Street to buy all the shares of Huawei and become a majority shareholder. That kind of stuff was never going to happen. So the only solution, the smart geopolitical solution, would have been to befriend Russia, and they dropped the ball.
Yeah. I always wonder if this is this type of decisions that the West have taken after the collapse of the Soviet Union vis-a-vis Russia, like they saw it as a prey, like that the Soviet Union has fallen and there is like a prey that they have to now divide and conquer and divide it more. Like you mentioned that the Americans were friends with the Russians when the Soviet Union collapsed, and one of them was Jeffrey Sachs, right? And he mentioned multiple times in his recent interviews that he helped the transformation of the Soviet economy into the current one in Russia. And whether he did it as a naive person, because he says he was naive, and or it was intentional, I cannot judge for that. But now he says that the Americans realized after the fall of the Soviet Union and during this transformation that this is not enough. We want to continue this against Russia and destabilize it and divide it further, the Federation, and started from the Chechenian door in Afghanistan. So it was always ongoing, let's say. Also in Syria, I consider it part of hitting the Russian fleet, for example, in the Mediterranean when it started in 2011. Was it incompetence? Was it hatred? I think it's a combination of many factors. And one of them is I repeat this in my live streamings because I want everybody to know that the people in charge of the foreign policy in the US, and we're not talking about people like Blinken or Jake Sullivan or this and that. Of course, these people are in the front. We can see their faces, but they are so much bigger, more influential people behind the scenes having influence over the foreign policy, and they hate Russia. And ideologically, they hate Russia, and ideologically, they hate China. So they are hardcore ideologues, and this makes them stupid when they pursue foreign policy. Like at the moment, for example, I just want to give an example, right? Syria and Turkey are talking because they want to solve their differences, and we remember that the same president in Turkey, Erdogan, he tried to kill Assad. Like literally, he tried to kill Assad, and he opened his borders for all these jihadists to come to Syria to do this and that. But this was in 2011, 2018. It's 2024, and they realized both sides that Turkey couldn't achieve its goals basically in Syria, and Syria also realized that they cannot remove Erdogan from power, so they have to talk, right? So talking even between enemies is a good and healthy thing in international relations if it achieves the objectives of your and the interests of your own people. And this is something that the Americans have to realize, that their country's foreign policy doesn't serve the interests of the American people to begin with, before talking about the interests of other people. Now, we have the head of NATO, the chief of NATO, Stoltenberg. He made a statement criticizing China. He said China is fueling the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II. And he attacked Xi Jinping personally. And I would like to play this 1 minute segment video, and then we listen to your take.
Publicly, President Xi has tried to create the impression that he's taking a back seat in this conflict to avoid sanctions and keep trade flowing. But that China is fueling the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. And at the same time, it wants to maintain good relations with the West. Well, Beijing cannot have it both ways. At some point, an changes course too. North Korea has delivered over 1 million artillery shells, and Iran has delivered thousands of deadly Shahed drones. In exchange, Pyongyang and Tehran are receiving Russian technology and supplies to help them advance their missile and nuclear capabilities. The growing alignment between Russia and its authoritarian friends. I have therefore invited the leaders of Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and the Republic of Korea to the NATO summit in Washington next month.
One of our friends, Tanvir, says NATO chief blasting China for fueling the war in Ukraine is filthy rich, total lack of self-awareness. Jens.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah.
I mean, this type of rhetoric, it's not productive vis-a-vis China, right? I mean, what are they trying to achieve with China here?
Yeah. So they cannot, okay. So first of all, it's so stupid, so who started the war? The US and the NATO, they started the war. And it really started in 2004, believe it or not. So that's when the US and George Soros, they first did the color revolution. So there was a guy who won the elections, fair and square in Ukraine. And then these guys, they held a massive protest, and they said the election was rigged, blah, blah, blah. And then they wanted a second election, and then they narrowly won. Okay. So then the US, it put in a puppet government in Ukraine. And that government started all the hostile policies against Russia. 4 years later, at the NATO summit, so Ukraine worked with NATO to say that Ukraine is going to join NATO. So that was the beginning. And the US ambassador who was in Russia at that time, he said, man, this is a very, very bad idea, and it's going to start a civil war in Ukraine, because at least 40% of the people in Ukraine are basically Russians, who've been living there for a long time. And those people are always going to be pro-Russia. And Ukraine wanting to join NATO is going to start a civil war. And he was right, And then in 2014, the US did the Maidan coup. They made friends with the neo-Nazis, who now became friends with all the Jewish leaders in Ukraine. The Jewish, the oligarch, Jewish prime minister, Yatsenyuk, Jewish President Poroshenko. They all suddenly became, friends. Oh, and Victoria Nuland, who passed out the cookies. She's also Jewish. And then she became friends with these really, really far right, totally Nazi guys. Like, I forgot the name. The Tanya book.
Yes.
Was the guy. Yeah. The Azov Battalion, Svoboda.
Right sector.
The right sector, all these people, and they would, stand on stage with John McCain, the neo-Nazi guy, and all these guys would be friends. And then NATO started to train and arm all these the neo-Nazi militias. So who has been fueling the war? It's the US and NATO, who who thought falsely that they could bring down Russia and do a regime change if they had this shock and awe sanctions. But then what happened was, but China saved Russia. So, like in that aspect, the NATO stupid chief is right in the sense that without China, Russia would not have been able to withstand the sanctions. So, because basically the Chinese currency, the yuan, has now replaced the dollar in Russia for all the foreign transactions. And the Chinese, the consumer goods, they have now, filling up the shelves in the grocery stores in Russia, and the cars, tractors, all of that are now Chinese. And well, although China is not supplying weapons just to satisfy the Americans, the Chinese are supplying parts and maybe the machineries that Russia can use to make weapons. So China plays a huge role, and why not? So you have the entire the European nations, 35 countries or something. They're all supporting Russia. So why cannot one country, China, give some support to its, the most essential ally? And so together, they're trying to build BRICS. They're trying to build a multipolar world. So they both are in it together. If one sings, the other one is going to sing. So they're in it together.
Totally. Guys, if you joined this live streaming later, I would like to just highlight that I put the X account of SL Kanthan in the description below, and also his podcast, Geopolitics Demystified, is also in the description below. You can hit him a follow. My friend, since you mentioned Stoltenberg again, there is another statement of him. He says, "We are afraid not only of Russia, but also China." I would like to play this short segment to you.
And for both North America and Europe, if we start to be divided, and especially in a world where we are afraid of not only Russia, but also the security consequences of China for our security. As I said, of course, NATO is good for European security, but NATO is also very good for US security. The United States is big, but it's not that big. It's 25% of world GDP. If you add all NATO allies, we are 50%, twice as big. That matters.
And that speaks to...
I would like to ask something more psychological here. When you see the chief of NATO and when you read and listen to American officials when they speak about Russia and China, I feel like they are projecting their own thoughts in this, like how they see the world. Everyone who is a rival is a threat, right? So it's either you are an ally of the United States, and that means like you are completely subjugated to the United States, even if the US destroys your own infrastructure and bombs your gas pipelines, for example, or you are a threat. Because, in politics, there are so many layers for a relationship, right? You can be an ally, a friend, a strategic relationship, this and that, a pact. But for this NATO and the US camp, you feel like you're either ally, they call it an ally, which is, in my opinion, not, or you represent a threat in this case. But this is coming from how they feel and how they see the world in their own eyes. Maybe in China or in Russia, they don't see the US and the rest of the NATO countries as a threat, as long as they're not expanding and putting their missiles on the borders with these countries, right?
Yeah. It's just a very warped view of life. It's, there's really something wrong in their soul, if I may. So NATO should have been, disbanded in 1992. there's no need for NATO. Once the Soviet Union fell apart, what was the need for NATO? So they have to justify the existence of NATO by having constantly one enemy after another. And they're just trying to find an excuse to expand NATO, like in Asia. So last year, so NATO wanted to open up an office in Japan, and fortunately, Macron stopped it. He said, "No, this is going way too far." So NATO is the North Atlantic, so let's focus on that. But now they're trying to create a new narrative, China threat, so that they can justify saying, "Oh, okay, so now NATO needs to bring in Japan, the Philippines, Australia." So, like, this is just a world mafia finding one excuse after another to expand. But they're going to fail because, okay, so that's another, that's a long discussion on why the U.S. is going to fail. But basically, by fueling the China threat, NATO so now can start to expand in Asia.
Exactly. Guys, if you joined this stream now, after 30 minutes, I would just encourage you to hit the like button, because this live stream reaches to more people when you hit the like button according to the YouTube algorithm. Now, President Putin went to North Korea, and he was received by the leader of North Korea in the airport. And then I watched a video. I don't know, I just found it funny that they were trying to invite each other to the car, and one person says, "No, you go first," and the second says, "No, you go first." Things like that happen a lot in our Eastern culture. In Syria, for example, when you want to respect someone, tell him, "Please have a seat." "No, you have a seat first." "No, you have a seat first." And then they start fighting who is going to sit first. I'm going just to play this video because I find it funny. They had a long after you moment there in the car. It feels like from the body language, and there is lots of respect now between the two leaders. How could this be translated in the Russia's war effort in Ukraine? I mean, Stoltenberg accused North Korea of providing ammunition, millions of or million ammunition to artillery shells to Russia, and the artillery shells are, in my opinion, one of the decisive weapons in this Ukraine conflict. If we check the geography there, so what is the role of North Korea here?
Yeah, so it might have been, just focusing on the artillery shell, it might have played a role maybe in the beginning, like in 2022. But now Russia's manufacturing has really ramped up. So they don't need any more help. And the Russian factories are making more shells than the US and the EU put together. So the Russian war machine is smooth, and it's very functional and effective now. But looking at the North Korea trip, like you showed, there's a lot of warmth, So Kim Jong-un, he came to the airport at like 3 in the morning to welcome Putin. And then afterwards, like there were like millions of people, North Koreans, I mean, lined up on both sides of the streets for miles and miles, waving and welcoming Putin. And then there was a grand ceremony with thousands of soldiers, with a huge parade. So it was a very, very sincere and warm friendship between those two.
Mm.
And it's also geopolitically, it is a game changer. It's going to not only change the geopolitical equation, it's going to change the future of North Korea. I think, like if we go back to 1978 and look at China, and they did the open end reform, and this is going to be that on steroids. So at the next the 10 to 15 years, North Korea is going to become very successful, very prosperous. It's going to be a dramatic change because so so there was this, one the military aspect, the treaty, like where they signed the mutual defense treaty, saying that if Russia is attacked, then North Korea will jump in, and the other way around. So that's a big thing for sure. And then the second thing is that Russia is going to provide North Korea with long range missiles, radars, and all the high tech stuff. Maybe
Yes.
even fighter jets. So that's going to be a game changer in the military aspect. But in the economic aspect, what they've done is they now have their own financial system between those two countries, just like SWIFT. So now they can completely circumvent the Western financial systems like SWIFT, and they don't have to use the dollar or the euro. And they're going to increase trade, transportation. They're building bridges. So the opportunities are just enormous,
Mm-hmm.
And so North Korea has a lot of very smart people, very tough people who are willing to work hard, and they're just waiting for that opportunity, just like Vietnam, China, Singapore, and all those countries. Once you gave them the opportunity, you let them out, and then they start like boom, really
Yes.
succeed.
I will play the devil's advocate here because this is a legitimate question. I think we should also discuss, and that is the argument from the NATO Western side that Putin is leading an alliance, or he is engaged in now alliances with autocratic countries, right? China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, for example, etc. So, from their perspective, this is not only a political alliance from on the international scene, but also an alliance of autocrats like Putin, Xi Jinping in Syria, in Iran, etc. I mean, in the West, there are liberal democracies. We have human rights. We have freedoms here to say whatever you want. In Russia or China, if you criticize the government, you could end up in jail. This and that. So how could the global majority, let's say, could be convinced that this is not an alliance of autocrats trying to grab their freedoms that the West is trying to export into their countries?
Okay. So this is a long discussion because these words, they really don't mean anything, So what do you mean by like an autocrat, and what do you mean by democracy? In the U.S., they've done studies like these two professors from the Princeton University. They studied all the laws that have been passed in the U.S. for 40 plus years. And they showed that the U.S. is not a democracy. It's actually like an oligarchy,
Mhm.
because the laws, they're all passed to favor the oligarchs. And whatever the people wanted, the chance of passing a law that favors the bottom, the 90% of the people, is very, very slim. And for the oligarchs, but two things happen. Well, either the top, the 1%, They always got what they wanted, or they were able to stop 100% of the time what they did not like. So what they wanted, they got about 50% of the time, but more importantly, they were able to stop what they did not want. So you look at the U.S. Both parties are just but two sides of the same coin. You know, it's the Democrats love Israel, the Republicans love Israel. The Democrats, they help big pharma and the banks. The Republicans love big pharma and Wall Street. What is the difference? Okay, they only fight over social issues. Oh, should
Cultural
gays get?
issues. Cultural issues. Like they just
Yeah,
try to divide and conquer their own people as well. The same thing they do to the rest of the world.
yeah. So what's the point? You look at Putin. He loves Russia. Okay, he doesn't need to play the divide and rule. He doesn't need to have stupid slogans.
Mm,
He wants to leave a legacy. Like he has the next 6 years to make a lasting legacy. And same thing in China. Yes, you lack some freedom, it's true, but the rewards are so much more. You get stability, you get meritocracy. You look at people like Xi Jinping, who had to start at the village level. He started at like a very very poor village, and he used to be like a mayor of this village, and he used to carry the farming tools on his shoulder. He used to work on the farm, and we can still see the house he lived in back in the 1980s. It's like a very, very poor hut.
mm,
That's how he started. And, like that's the meritocracy. Like if we go to, like if you want to go to a doctor, to have a surgery, do you choose the most popular doctor who's like very handsome, who gives amazing speeches? He has a beautiful wife. No,
nice
like
socks, like Trudeau.
yeah, right, exactly. So you don't care if the doctor is ugly,
Mm,
he's not a good speaker, he's very nerdy.
mm,
He hates public speeches. Who cares? You want a really good surgeon to fix your heart. That's what you want. So a politics should be like that. And then, so like that's the big picture. And then also in the democracy, if you do not do what the oligarchs of the US want, they will demonize you. Okay. So, for example, if, say, Macron, he says tomorrow that the US war in Ukraine should stop, the Israeli war on Gaza should stop. Oh my God.
mhm.
Can you imagine in like a 5 days, Macron will be turned into a dictator. The CIA will release all kinds of photos and videos and recorded speeches against him. Like there will be some guy who will come and say, "When I was 17, Macron raped me." Like they will just destroy him. So that's what democracy means in the US. Like you play the role, drama, but you never speak out against the banks. You never speak out against the military industrial complex. You never speak out against the CIA. You never speak out against the Zionists. So there are these like the big things that really matter, you know so like Federal Reserve Bank, like the
Mm,
banksters. The banksters rule the world,
mm,
but no politician can dare to speak out against them.
mm.
So nobody can dare to say the Americans are being screwed by the banks and the corporations. So let's fix the economy and help the average American. So if you say that, they will say that you are, like they will find all kinds of cheesy terms to
Yes.
attack you and to demonize you. So, I mean, I don't really believe in this the dictator versus democracy, because the U.S. Does not have a true democracy. And if you look at the definition of a democracy, as Lincoln said, so it has to be of the people, by the people, and for the
For the
people,
people.
right? So, like, if you look at, say, like, President Assad, President Putin, President Xi Jinping, they, they fit that the description, So, Syria is run by Syrians, for Syrians, and of the Syrians.
Mm-hmm.
And China is not run by people from Mars. They are run by Chinese people, for the Chinese people, and you just have to look at the record, right? You look at what has Putin done for Russia, what has Xi Jinping done for China, what did President Assad do for Syria, and the answer is very clear.
This is a fascinating explanation from your side, and if I were an American in the 60s, for example, maybe maximum in the 70s, when housing was affordable and life was affordable and the gas was affordable, I would have probably liked the US and living in the US and this and that. But now, I'm specifically speaking about 2024 now, right? Like, the US is getting, sorry to say, raped by these corporations, by the banksters. And they are, sorry again to say, they are raping their own people. And the amount of inflation and the drop in the value of the dollar because of the endless wars and printing of money, it's unsustainable for the American people themselves. I mean, this is something that I always argued, right? Because you mentioned really brilliant examples. Like, I lived in Syria my entire life, right? And my father bought, this was probably 25 or 28 years ago, an apartment in Aleppo, in a very good neighborhood, which is the center of the city, this and that, like in the center. And this was like 110 square meter or something, with 2 balconies and everything. And he bought it for $60,000.
Wow.
Right. And people, if you wanted to buy a villa with a swimming pool, you would pay like 100K, right? With a swimming pool, with a garden, it's amazing, right? I remember my uncle, he bought like a villa on the peripheries of Aleppo with a big garden and chickens, and he built two etage and with the swimming pool, everything, and it costed him, because it's outside of the city, 60,000, right? Dollars. So bread is affordable, education is free, the medical health care was free, and like the vast majority of the people can afford everything, right? And you don't need to wake up at 5 in the morning to run for your job so that you can put the bread on the table. Life was easy in Syria. This is the type of economic and social system that this quote-unquote dictatorship in Syria has established, right? This is what they call autocracy. In my opinion, the vast majority of the people would prefer this type of system, where life is easier and they have more time for social interactions, family interactions, and just social life, right? And you come then to Europe. I come to Europe, and I'm not like saying like I regretted coming to Europe or to Germany, this and that. But life is harder here. You need to work way more to secure bread for your family. And people are so stuck in this vicious circle of waking up and going to work and sleeping early and coming back, and like every day, every day, every day. And then every year you have a 2 weeks of vacation. That's it. But you're living in a democracy. You can say whatever you want. Yeah, you can say not everything, but how much impactful is your voice? That's the question. You can protest nowadays against the government here, But does the government listen to you? Is the government now in Germany listening to the people who are not happy with the policy in Gaza, for example? No. So they don't represent the voices, right? They were elected by the people, but the people are unhappy with this policy, but they don't change the policy. So it's a really tricky, I would say, discussion. But the NATO side is trying to simplify it, like those are the autocrats and those are no. It's more complicated than that. I totally agree with you. I will just play the last video for you before we finish this conversation with Blinken again. He just made a new statement, and he apparently isn't happy with Putin's trip to North Korea. Let's take a look.
With regard to Mr. Putin and his travels to North Korea, look, we've seen, as you've said, Russia try in desperation to develop and to strengthen relations with countries that can provide it with what it needs to continue the war of aggression that it started against Ukraine. And you heard the Secretary General just reference this. North Korea is providing significant munitions to Russia and other weapons for use in Ukraine. Iran has been providing weaponry, including drones, that have been used against civilians and civilian infrastructure. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the deep concerns we have about China, not in terms of providing weapons, but in providing what Russia needs to keep its defense industrial base going and to produce itself more tanks, more munitions, more missiles. Yes, these are the countries of concern.
So it's an act of desperation. If you go to X, just type Putin and desperate now, and you will see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tweets by journalists, talking heads, think tankers, all these researchers. They're all using the same term. This visit is an act of desperation. Your take on this?
Well, it's not it's not an act of desperation, but he's trying to send a message. He's trying to speak to the Western psychopaths a language that they would understand. So he sent the naval ships to Cuba and to Venezuela, and the submarines are very close to Miami. Why? Because that is the only way that the Americans would understand what they're doing is wrong. But otherwise they have no self-awareness. Like they fly, the planes from the U.S. They go all the way to China, and then the CNN reporter says, "Oh my God, there is a Chinese plane that is so close to our plane. It is so wrong. What are you doing on Chinese border?" So like they have no self-awareness about NATO expansion, the U.S. military bases all around Russia, the U.S. giving long-range missiles to Ukraine. Like we are very close to a nuclear war, and
Yes.
people don't understand that. Because if Russia sees a missile from Ukraine and flying towards Moscow, they have to assume the worst case scenario, that it's a nuclear weapon, and then they have to respond in like a few seconds, because if there is a missile from Ukraine and it's flying towards Moscow, it may take like 2-3 minutes, and then Putin and the Russian military, they have to make a decision at a spot, a few seconds. And if they think, that it's a nuclear weapon, because it's going to be a huge nuclear war, right? Because they cannot just send one nuclear weapon to Ukraine. That's not how the nuclear, the arms, the war is going to work. So when you see one nuclear weapon, then you have to assume that there are going to be a few hundreds on the way,
Yes.
and then so then you have to be preemptive, and then Russia has to send a few dozen nuclear missiles towards New York and Washington, D.C. It's a very dangerous game that the U.S. is playing. And if we go back to the 1960s, we can see what kind of psychopaths are at the very, very top leadership in the U.S. So, one of the guys, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so like this guy is in charge of basically the entire military. So he came to JFK and he said, let's do a nuclear war with Russia. And JFK asked, okay, so what is the worst case scenario? He goes, well, whatever happens, we win. And then JFK goes, what do you mean we win? So he goes, we are going to kill like 90% of the Russians, but only 50% of the Americans will die. So we will have more people left at the end of the nuclear war. And that's a win.
Yeah.
These people are just, okay. And then they had a plan to drop nuclear bombs on 1,200 cities in the Soviet Union and China. Okay. I mean, like this was a very, very detailed plan in the late 1950s.
And imagine what could happen now. I mean, this was in the 50s. Imagine with the development of these weapons and the increasing level of psychopathy among the decision makers in such cases. And guys, when he mentioned that we are on the brink of a nuclear war, this is not fear mongering, by the way. I will tell you why. Because there are certain weapon systems that NATO countries have supplied Ukraine. These weapons could carry tactical nuclear bombs. So, for example, if Germany supplies Ukraine with a Taurus system, and the Taurus system could carry tactical nuclear weapons, F-16 could carry tactical nuclear rockets or weapons. So, if these weapons are used against Russia inside of Russian territory, from the Russian side, if you're a Russian general, a colonel, and you're reading the radar, you don't know if this is a nuclear coming to you or a conventional weapon. So you could take the worst case scenario in this case, and you have what is called the nuclear doctrine of Russia, and they say clearly that if we are under attack, this is what we're going to do. So this is not a joke. This is not a game, and I'm baffled by this decision, and also how many people aren't aware that how close are we to such a scenario. And when people like, I don't know if you know him, Kim.com says that go south. It's like people think that he's fear mongering, but no. If such a scenario happens, God forbidden, entirety of the north of you were talking about Europe, the US, China, Russia, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, this could all be wiped off the map. This is not something that we would like to see, and therefore we present to you this fact so that you understand it and you tell the people around you, you tell your relatives, you tell your friends, you tell your people following you on your X account, on your Facebook account, on your YouTube account. Just raise awareness about these cases, because there is nothing is worth wiping out humanity off the map because some psychopaths want to stay a dominant power on the international scene. History is a cycle, and you see from all the empires, they come and go. And we just hope that the American empire would try to find the mutual ground with Russia and China and be part of the multipolar world. This is the wish of the majority of the world. It's a win-win situation if the US joins the multipolar world. But they are too arrogant and they are too ideologically driven to accept that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that they are sane people in the US, and that humanity would not be, and the fate of humanity would not be completely changed because of some very few people in DC refusing to give up the keys of in the international system. Guys, this was an amazing conversation today with my friend S.L. Kanthan. He's a geopolitical analyst, and his X account, as I mentioned, is in the description below. And most importantly, his new podcast is also in the description below. My friend, do you want them to go to somewhere else also to find your work?
Those two are good starters. And then I also have links to my Substack on my Twitter, so they can find that.
Yeah, if you follow him on X, you will also find the link of his Substack in his bio. I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Anyways, guys, this was an amazing chat today. I'm very thankful for all of you who tuned in on YouTube and on Rumble. If you like this content, just hit the like button, and also make sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel. And if you like to support the independent work that I'm doing, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. And I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. I will be with Kit Clarenberg. We will discuss the British intelligence role in creating a neo-Nazi militia, which has now a presence also in Germany. I'm so happy about that. So we will see you tomorrow. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.